a relaxed, dreary Sunday morning.
Yeah. Yeah, this is kind of weather I don't really want to drive in, but I drive up to Huntsville this afternoon. So
Oh yeah.
yeah.
What's your schedule in Huntsville these days?
So I'm there pretty much Mondays through Thursdays.
Mhm.
So trying to I've just made up my hours that I didn't get last semester. So I'm in the process of the ones I'm getting now accrue for this semester. So
Yeah.
but it's good. I'm enjoying it. It's a really good um good place to work, and I'm loving the work. So
Good. That's
yeah.
awesome. I remember those days of every hour counts, every 15-minute increment counts.
Oh yes.
It'll
Yes.
dominate your thinking for a little while.
Yeah. Well, it definitely makes you mindful of the time.
It does. It'll do exactly that.
Yeah. So anyway, but like I said, I'm actually really enjoying it. One of the fun things I'm doing, and this is a nerdy kind of thing, but I'm doing program analysis, which is I'm taking the intensive outpatient program and I'm looking at people's ongoing assessments and the progress they're making and graphing it and making it pretty. And that's really cool actually to see. When I'm a visual learner, when you see things, see people making progress, it's exciting.
Yeah, that is cool. That's very cool. That's one thing we don't get a lot of in private practice.
Yes.
Like getting to see metrics and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Camille.
Good morning. So what's been going on with you?
Oh my gosh. I mean, what does everybody say? Busy,
Yeah.
work, and I'm about to enter starting Wednesday. I will be in a period of about 4 months of like hopping around time zones. So I've got a lot of travel coming up. So I leave for Las Vegas on Wednesday. I'll be there for a little bit, and then I'm getting ready to turn 40 in March. And I'm
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm going to Portugal, Morocco, and Spain for my 40th birthday.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah. And then in May, I'm officiating 2 weddings, and one of them is in Cape Cod, which will be beautiful and fun. And so just a lot of cool travel coming up. So that's kind of what I'm focused on right now.
My friends, Kevin and Mary, are in Morocco right now.
Oh, cool.
And I don't know if you want me to link you up. They're posting pictures from their travels and stuff. If you would like me to see if I can connect y'all.
Totally. I'll only be in Marrakesh for 2 nights. So it's kind of just to put feet on the ground and kind of, walk around and had to have been there. But I will take.
I'm sorry, what?
I think they had a guide they really liked in Marrakesh.
Yes. They had a guide that they liked in Marrakesh.
That's what everybody says is get a guide. You can get like a day or a half day or something.
Yeah. They really liked the guy they were hanging out with.
Yeah.
Good morning, Tony.
Hey, Tony.
Good morning. I'm gonna be on and off camera. I don't know what's going on with my thing.
Yeah.
Can you hear me right?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay.
Yeah, video's a little weird.
It's like you got a visual effect going on.
I do not. It's a malfunction.
Yeah.
A bug, not a feature.
There we go.
There you are. So, Tony, you had a big kind of moment this week. You're leaving your job, right?
Yeah. This is a really big moment all the way around. I left my job that I got earlier this year that I really liked. I wasn't in love with it, but I really liked it. I liked something. We did some good work. A lot of social justice work around labor. And it was just a good place to be. But then around the last part of December, I got a call from a friend who was like, "Hey, we got some positions open at our company, and I know you applied for a job last year in Atlanta. You should apply because they have a position in Birmingham." And I got that job, and it is a great job. So like I had that going on. I'm really just in my second week of work. And Friday we had a community event in Atlanta, And there was a young man there who I met here. We were trying to get him on PrEP, the pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV. By the time we tried to get him on it, it was like he was already seroconverted. And he was really depressed. Like, I thought that boy was gonna like unalive himself. And me and my team trying to work with him to make sure he was okay. And I go to Atlanta, and he's actually working in the HIV field in Atlanta, helping other people. And that just
Wow.
That's awesome.
it just kind of reconfirms like I'm on the right path and doing what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. Those moments can be so rare in that type of work, but it feels so good when you get to have
Yeah,
one.
I don't know what's going on with this thing now.
You've had a
Cool.
it does. If it was intentional, it'd be awesome. So
Right.
I've looked, it may be possessed. I've been watching this show on Paramount called Evil. Y'all would love it. Like you would love it. The guy who played Luke Cage and Marvel's Luke Cage, and this late, I can't think of her name, but they're like these investigators for the Catholic Church who are like investigating things that may be exorcism worthy. So you got Michael, that's his name. His real name is Michael, but he is the priest in training. You got this psychologist who's an atheist, and then you got this Muslim guy who's like that scientific guy who has a scientific reason for everything. Every now and then they can't figure out scientific reasons.
that sounds like a good show.
That sounds right up our alley.
It does.
It's awesome. It's awesome.
Party.
Angela's telling me about a podcast she's listening to where it's takes place on the American and Canadian border in this fictional town where a bunch of weird stuff is going on, and they have a branch of the Inquisition there. Speaking of, but it's yeah, so it's the way it's called Ache Willow, she says.
And
I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah, it's a story podcast, so. Yeah. Well, I'm really glad to see y'all. And Melissa, good to have you on board today. Is Rob going to be joining us, Miller? I missed that. Okay.
He's got a bit of crud. He doesn't feel great this morning.
I'm so sorry. Well, Melissa, can you step in and be the voice of the people then?
Absolutely.
And if we don't have Paula online, so how about I will do the Hebrew Bible reading, and then which is one of my favorites. And then Miller, if you will do the gospel reading, and Tony, if you'll be the liturgist, that'd be awesome. All right, let me get this up. And y'all pardon any typos, because I was doing this last night and I was a little bit bleary-eyed. So,
oh Lord, you know how I am reading. All right, here we go. On this day in 1996, France announced was ending the nuclear wars testing, nuclear weapons testing. See, that ain't even your fault. On this day in 2008, Egypt loosened government restrictions on people who did not adhere to one of its 3 official religions. Today is also the birthday of Katharina von Bora, a former Roman Catholic nun who married Martin Luther, Emanuel Swedenborg, an astronaut, Christian reformer, and mystic whose teachings inspired Johnny Appleseed and Helen Keller, among others. Greetings. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones.
As beloved ones.
As blessed ones.
Draw near and let us break the bread of life.
Psalms 40:1-9. Who can live in your tent, sovereign one? Who can dwell on your holy mountain?
The person who lives free of blame, does what is right, and speaks the truth sincerely.
Who does no damage with their talk, does no harm to a friend, doesn't insult a neighbor.
Someone who despises those who act wickedly, but honors those who honor the sovereign one.
Someone who keeps their promise even when it hurts.
Someone who doesn't lend money with interest.
Who won't accept a bribe against an innocent person.
Whoever does these things will never stumble.
So much for modern Christianity.
Amen. Dave, you're talking, but I think you're muted.
I didn't get the title changed. That wasn't Psalm 40. So just FYI.
It was a good message, though.
It was, isn't it? It's a great psalm. Okay, this is from Micah 6, 1-8. Hear what the Sovereign One is saying. Arise, lay out the lawsuit before the mountains. Let the hills hear your voice. Hear, mountains, the lawsuit of the Sovereign One. Hear, eternal foundations of the earth. The one God has a lawsuit against her people. With Israel she will argue. My people, what did I ever do to you? How have I wearied you? Answer me. I brought you up out of the land of Egypt. I redeemed you from the house of slavery. I sent Moses, Aaron, and Miriam before you. My people, remember what Moab's king Balak had planned, and how Balaam, Beor's son, answered him. Remember everything from Shittim to Gilgal, that you might learn to recognize the righteous acts of the God who sees. With what should I approach the womb of life and bow down before God on high? Should I come before her with entirely burned offerings, with year-old calves? Will the righteous one be pleased with thousands of rams, with many torrents of oil? Should I give my oldest child for my crime, the fruit of my body for the sin of my spirit? She has told you, human one, what is good, and what the Sovereign One requires from you, to do justice, embrace faithful love, and walk humbly with your God.
John 1, 29-42. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up a mountain. He sat down, and his disciples came to him. He taught them, saying, Happy are people who are hopeless, because the reign of heaven is theirs. Happy are people who grieve, because they will be made glad. Happy are people who are humble, because they will inherit the earth. Happy are people who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness, because they will be fed until they are full. Happy are people who show mercy, because they will receive mercy. Happy are people who have pure hearts, because they will see God. Happy are people who make peace, because they will be called God's children. Happy are people whose lives are harassed, because they are righteous, because the reign of heaven is theirs. Happy are you when people insult you and harass you and speak all kinds of bad and false things about you, all because of me. Be full of joy and be glad, because you have a great reward in heaven. In the same way, people harass the prophets who came before you. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
In my religion, Helen Keller wrote, since my 17th year, I have tried to live according to the teachings of Emanuel Swedenborg. By church, he did not mean an ecclesiastical organization, but a spiritual fellowship of thoughtful men and women who spend their lives for service to mankind that outlasts them. He called it a civilization that was born of a healthy universal religion, goodwill, mutual understanding, service from each to all, regardless of dogma or ritual. Emanuel Swedenborg wrote, if we would accept heaven's life, we need by all means to live in the world and to participate in its duties and affairs. In this way, we accept a spiritual life by means of our moral and civic life, and there is no other way a spiritual life can be formed within us. No other way our spirits can be prepared for heaven. This is because living in an inner life and not an outer life at the same time is like living in a house that has no foundation. Gradually, either settles or develops gaping cracks or totters until it collapses.
So thank y'all for getting us started with worship today. So we'll go into a time of prayer. If you are tuning in online, thanks, by the way, if you're tuning in on Facebook or YouTube. If you want to lift up a prayer request, you can type it in the chat or the comments, and we'll share it online. And then we will all join together in the prayer that Jesus taught us. So let's pray together. God, we give you thanks that we are able to gather today from various places and be one in heart and mind and voice. We give you thanks that we are alive, that we get to experience the world in all its beauty and its terror. We've been made aware of its terror yet again this week, as we've seen the brutality of law enforcement against an innocent person. We're also made aware, God, of all the gratitude that we have for you, for the things in our personal lives. Help us to hold these things in tension, both the terror of the world and the beauty and hope to be found in it. Help us to live the words of your prophet Micah, that we may do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with you. God, when we are bewildered and don't know what to do, we remember that you are a God who makes a way where there seems to be no way. That we have stories of you parting the sea, of creating giant change in the world. And when our souls so desperately long for change, help us to be patient and steadfast, knowing that change is slow until it isn't. Help us to celebrate every victory of justice over wickedness and oppression. Help us to celebrate every victory of love over hatred and peace over war. We lift up to you situations that are close to our hearts, the concerns that dominate our lives with our own mortality, lack of resources, the struggles that we all engage on in the daily business of living. I invite you to share your prayer requests and your praises.
For the family of Tyree Nichols.
Lord, hear our prayer.
In gratitude for Camille's mom's 94th birthday.
Lord, hear our prayer. For Black mothers everywhere. Lord, hear our prayer.
For Ted Davis.
Lord, hear our prayer. For Jamie Harmon and her family. Lord, hear our prayer.
For blessings and healing on this wonderful holy day and for celebrations to come.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Mason and Merle Ayers.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For young Black men everywhere.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Stanley Hurst.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For order in a viewer's house.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For transgender children and adults in their positions.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For healthcare workers.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Ada Swenson.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Surge, Black Lives Matter, and all other collectives in the struggle at hand.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those struggling to make ends meet.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For people with chronic pain.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the future and hope that the growth coming with it is good.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gratitude for new opportunities.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those in search of affordable housing.
Lord, hear our prayer.
for those fighting for justice everywhere.
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, we are grateful that when we join our voices together, that you are present, that you hear the pain and the desires of our hearts, and that you are already moving to act to bring about your reign on this earth. We pray every week for your will to be done, and we know when we pray that leaves us with our hands full of both blessings and work to do. And so we join with Jesus in the prayer that he taught us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So I love the lectionary passages for today. These are some of my favorite scriptures, both the Beatitudes that we read and the passage from Micah. Tony, did you want to lift up something real quick?
I just want to know, where was the responsive reading from, since it went Psalms 40?
Oh, let me I have to go look it up real quick. Let's see. It was the lectionary for the day, and I just went after I got the it was Psalm 15. That's a great one, isn't it?
But it is very, very indicative of where modern day Christianity is not doing right now. I'm like, oh, they ain't doing none of this.
Right. Well, and so I would also point out that the one thing I like about that particular one is it's the Common English Bible translation. The other translations make it sound like highfalutin, and instead of translating instead of translating righteousness, it translates justice. Righteousness, we typically think of self-righteous, like, oh, I'm a good person, instead of it being something about I'm trying to make the world into a more just place, right? Just like in fact, you're anticipating what I'm going to talk about, because the Beatitudes, one of my favorite parts is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst. It usually says for righteousness, right? Most of us hear it that way. Hunger and thirst for righteousness. Righteousness means justice. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. And if you hear it that way, suddenly it changes its meaning, right? It's like, I'm not just striving to be a good person. I'm striving for a quality that I want to see in the world. And most of us are hungry and thirsty for justice. And again, that ties it back to the Micah passage. What does the Lord require of you but to do justly, love kindness, and walk humbly with God? Well, so the Beatitudes are what I like to say the opening salvo in Jesus's manifesto on the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is in Matthew, starting in chapter 5, 6, and 7. And in the Sermon on the Mount are contained most of Jesus's most famous sayings. Like in every line is something you've heard from the Gospels. So, don't judge lest ye be judged. Why worry about tomorrow? Consider the birds. They don't toil or sow, and yet God feeds them. Don't worry. You can't add a single day to your life by worrying. Can't change a single hair on your head from white to black. So many things in there. Don't store up treasures for yourself where moth and rust consume and thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. So it's chock full of like Jesus's greatest hits. So Gandhi used to say he used to sit down and read the Sermon on the Mount every day. So that was his ritual. He would read the Sermon on the Mount. It's a great piece of writing. And even for those who are not Christians, who aren't believers, you got to recognize the Sermon on the Mount is a powerful piece of writing. It's a powerful way to live. And if you read through it, you're like, man, if we lived this way, wouldn't the world be a better place? So it's an opening salvo, I like to say, because it's also not addressed to individuals. It's not you personally need to do this, 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 and this. Jesus is saying, y'all do this. Y'all be this way. Y'all are the light of the world. Y'all are the salt of the earth. Not you individually, but y'all together. And it's the charter, I think, for the church, for a group of people who believe this way and want to follow these teachings. So it starts off, I'm actually going to pull it back up on the screen here because I think it's worth looking at. Here we go. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up a mountain. He sat down and his disciples came to him and he began to teach them, saying, and here's the first line, happy are people who are hopeless, because the reign of heaven, sometimes translated the kingdom of God, is theirs. Happy are people who are hopeless. And so like from the get-go, there's a paradox, and it's meant to kind of push you back and say, what? What do you mean happy are people who are hopeless? Sometimes it's translated, congratulations, those of you who are hopeless. Sometimes this is translated, blessed are the poor in spirit. And people have tied themselves in knots trying to talk about what poor in spirit means. But I really like the Common English Bible translation, happy are the hopeless. Luke makes it a lot more basic. Luke says, happy are those who are poor, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. And then he flips it around and says, woe to you who are rich. So Luke's a little bit more punchy. But in Matthew, Jesus says, happy are those who are hopeless. So what does it mean to say, happy are people who are hopeless? Happy are people who grieve. And this next one, humble, it's been pointed out that that's usually we think of humble as a moral quality, but it really comes from humiliation. Happy are people who've been humiliated. Happy are people who are hungry and thirsty for justice. So 1, 2, 3, 4 of the beginnings are things that we don't typically think of as positive, right? To be hopeless, to be grieving, to feel humiliated, to be hungry and thirsty for justice because you're not getting justice. Those first 4 are not things we typically associate with being happy. And I think that we need to hear that, because so often when this is preached, it's like, oh, let me talk about how wonderful these things are going to be. Jesus is making a deliberate paradox here. He's wanting you to go, what the hell are you talking about, Jesus? Happy are people who are hopeless. Happy are people who grieve. Happy are those who are humiliated. Happy are those who are hungry and thirsty for justice. Now he starts turning about halfway through this, and then he starts talking about qualities, right? People who show mercy, people who have pure hearts, people who make peace. So again, let me break this down. The first 4, happy are blank, things you don't normally associate with happiness: hopelessness, grieving, humiliation, and being hungry and thirsty for righteousness. I think that hungry and thirsty for righteousness right there, I think that's the turning point in this poetry, right? Because he starts off with the paradox, the things that make you go, what? And then he gives you a key. Those who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness feel all this stuff. They feel hopeless. They feel grief. They feel humiliated. People who hunger and thirst for righteousness feel these things. And because they're hungry and thirsty for righteousness, they show mercy, they have pure hearts, and they work for peace. I think poetically that this is it's kind of like a mirrored structure here. You hear it? The first part's what the heck? Then there's the middle piece, and then there's the second, okay, I'm getting it now. And then he goes on. Happy are people whose lives are harassed, often translated people who are persecuted, because they are righteous, right? So people who are being persecuted because they are pursuing justice, the kingdom of heaven, the reign of heaven is theirs. And then he makes it about you. Happy are y'all when people insult you and harass you and speak all kinds of bad and false things about you, all because of me. Be full of joy and be glad, because you have a great reward in heaven. In the same way, people harass the prophets who came before you. So my read on this whole first bit that introduces the Sermon on the Mount is that Jesus is saying, people who follow me are called to be prophets. Prophets hunger and thirst for righteousness, and therefore they often feel hopeless, grieving, disappointed, frustrated. And it's because they have pure hearts, because they ache for peace, because they're trying to make peace, because they want to show mercy, right? That's the life you're going to lead. And because of this, you are a prophet. You're also going to be harassed. These are words for people who march in the streets. This is what I think the community of the church community is supposed to be, right? People who hunger and thirst for justice. So to me, this reads true. It's meant to throw you on your heels and say, wait, what are you talking about, Jesus? And if you don't know already, if you're part of this community, you probably get that religion isn't supposed to be me just trying to be a good person, right? And it's not just about worshiping and saying the right things. Like, worship is the stuff that you do in the world that transforms it. That's worship. Now, I'm not saying ritual is bad. I love ritual. I love the pomp and circumstance of big worship. But the angle, Jesus's opening salvo is, if you are following me, you're probably going to be frustrated as hell. And you're probably going to feel hopeless. And you're probably going to grieve the state of the world. If you're following me, be happy about that. That's the opening salvo, right, of this manifesto. And that's why I think it's fire. I mean, to me, the beginning of this is paradox, because it's meant to punch you in the face with the truth and say, look, if you're going to do this, if you're going to be passionate about following me, this is what you can expect. You can expect to be pretty frustrated for most of your life. Congratulations. That's how Jesus starts. So for me also, the lectionary does a great job. Tony, the psalm that you pointed out that spoke to you, I'm going to pull that up too, because I just think this is it's so powerful. People don't understand what religion's about, right? So the psalmist is asking, who can come before you? Who can really worship you, right? Who can dwell on your holy mountain? And so there's a couple of ways of reading this, because you can read this as like really self-righteous, religious-y stuff. The person who lives free of blame, does what is right, speaks truth sincerely. But you dig into the actual things. What are we talking about? Someone who doesn't damage others with their talk, who doesn't harm a friend, doesn't insult a neighbor, someone who despises those who act wickedly, honors those who honor the sovereign one, someone who keeps their promises when it hurts. Like, these are specific things that seem to have nothing to do with worship, right? And what with religion, with civic religion. This isn't about saying the right prayers or believing the right things. This is about action. Like, how do you live in the world? How do you move through the world? Do you leave a path of destruction in your wake? Or do you leave a path of healing and wholeness in your wake? Same story with the Micah passage. God's asking, what did I ever do to you? What did I do to you to be upset with me? And the prophet says, it doesn't matter how much I sacrifice. It doesn't matter like giving offerings, doing these elaborate things that show my dedication are really nothing compared to just trying to make the world a better place, right? To do justice, to be humble, not to be extravagant or showy or to come off as a spiritual person. Someone who's just quietly doing the right thing has really understood what real spirituality is about. So I'm going to shut up because I could keep talking about these passages, but all three of these I think are just so, to me, this is the core of what it means to follow Jesus. All right, I'll shut up and let you all talk. Comments, responses?
I'll start. It's funny. I went and grabbed something to eat before we got started, and there was a song by Maurette Brown Clark. She's a gospel artist that does a lot of the chanty songs, I like to call them. Mm-hmm. And she started the song out, and she was saying that, pretty much, God, if you never gave me anything else, it would be enough. And where that is an awesome thought process, I was thinking, like, are there any middle of the road gospel songs? Because they're always like feast or famine. There's nothing right in the middle. It's like, God, if you don't do nothing, I'm good, or give me everything and I'm even better. There is no like mediocre blessings. Mm-hmm. And as we looked at these passages, especially from Psalms 15, my biggest thing about why I left the church, why so many other people leave the church is, if you read Psalms 15, like, you ain't even got to go deep on it. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't even have to go deep. Like, and you think about, especially those of us who jumped out of big churches, like, nothing in Psalms 15 goes on in church. It's literally the opposite. We're there to make you feel bad because you're a sinner. You're not going to get into heaven because you're not going to. Like, there's always, and it's almost as if people got away from Jesus' teachings and wanted to be Jesus themselves. So, like, you're going to have to follow me in the message that I'm telling you that Jesus has put forth. Because you're hard pressed to find preachers who are really talking what Jesus wanted people to do, especially in conservative circles. Like, these people literally do not want to fund social programs to help the poor. It's right here. It's in the book. It's right here. That's what you should be doing. And they don't want to do it, but somehow, by some stretch of the imagination, some mental gymnastics, they are the better of the angels because, you have to get it on your own with no help from nobody else. And that's literally the antithesis of what Jesus said. The last one I want to bring up is what you said about when you were talking about what Jesus told the disciples, like, this ain't no easy way, bro. Like, you're going to be talked about, you're going to be scorned. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine putting that on a job application?
Yeah.
Who's going to apply for that job?
Yes.
Like, who's going to apply for that job? And so, like, when we profess to be Christians, like, we're answering a job description put out by Jesus. Supposedly, but that's not the job description that Jesus really put out. This is the job that the people who want to be Jesus have put out, because they want to give you these great benefits and tell you that, you're safe in the arms of Jesus and blah, 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 blah. When literally Jesus is like, hey, this is a really crappy job.
Yes.
If you want to be one of my followers, like, this is not it. Like, this is a terrible job with really, really mediocre benefits that you're really not even going to get until you die.
Right.
And you're like, who's gonna sign up for that? Like, who's gonna sign up for that? And so, like, we have to be real with ourselves. We have to be real with what thus said the Lord, because, like, the stuff that we've been taught is a bunch of crap. Like, it is terrible. That's all.
No, thank you for that. Right. Who would sign up for this job? I think that's That I love the way you encapsulated that. Thank you. Yeah, Melissa.
I'm having so much fun picturing this job listing, like fast-paced environment, health insurance, and you're gonna be frustrated for the rest of your life.
Yes.
I feel like every time I get on here, I'm like, it's about the ego. Like, I feel like that's like my like drum that I always beat. But it's impossible for me to read all of these passages together without feeling like Jesus is really actively calling people out on their egos, like as kind of his thesis statement. Like basically all of this is like, it's not about you. Like if you want to follow this path, like you've got to put your ego aside. You're not going to be happy. You're not going to be rich. You're not going to be, this is not a glorification of self process that we're going through here. This is about doing the work that's needed. And that is, that's so profoundly humbling, especially to read it in a context 2000 years later, where so much of the focus of faith, and Tony, I think this is kind of the direction you were thinking too, has become this like personal relationship with Jesus, toxic theology type stuff of like, if I sit in my room and read my Bible and, you know, do what my pastor tells me to do, then I have one Christianity. When Jesus was never saying anything about that. He was like, this is not a game you can win. This is not, you know, a feel good operation. We're not going to summer camp here. Like, you're going to do very difficult, hard work, and you've got to set your own personal ego aside to do that.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Melissa. Yeah, Miller. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I think that this is the first time that I've heard the Beatitudes as more of like, I don't know, have some kind of flow to them, because so many times I feel like you get this sort of, well, this is the instruction manual. You got to be these things, you know, like, or it's treated like a list poem, which, you know, I've written those, like, you know, I am such and such, I am such and such, and it's all sort of disjointed, but that's the point, you know? But I really like the idea that they're, you know, the first three things, you know, that's what you are now, you know, and this, you know, and then the turn, and then, you know, this is what you got to do, you know, I don't know, which kind of brings me to Carrie's comment. She says, Dave, I would love to hear your perspective as a therapist on living with the state of mind that comes with practicing the Beatitudes, thereby being in a perpetual state of sorrow. How can justice work be done while remaining mentally healthy? And like my own feeling about that, I mean, obviously I want you to answer too.
Go for it.
My own, I'm not a professional, but my own feeling is that it's not really a prescription. You know, this is more of a diagnosis at the beginning. I don't know, like, do you feel this way? Well, this is what's happening. That's what I'm getting out of this.
Thank you for that. So yeah, well, Melissa's the professional on here, so I'm still in training. So give us your take, Melissa.
Man, that's a great question. First of all, I mean, I think that's one of those spiritual questions that you could sit with for decades. But I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me in answering that question is like the mental and emotional maturity it takes to understand that multiple things can be true at the same time. Like we can do really hard work and know it's the right thing and be really sad about the fact that we have to do that work. And we can hold all of that. But, you know, the dualistic mindset that we live in Western society tells us it has to be all good or all bad, that black and white thinking that we talked about earlier. But I mean, really, I think what this is a call to dialectical thinking, to hold opposites at the same time, which takes a lot of personal growth work to be able to hold that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a process.
Thank you. So both, like Miller's, I think you're, you know, saying this is descriptive, first of all, not prescriptive, and then Melissa saying this is like there's like this is a dialectic. There's two things going on here, and I would say also like there's the Jesus makes the narrative connection there. He says, hey, remember those prophets, those people you celebrate as heroes of the faith? Yeah, they felt like you feel. So, you know, it's really kind of putting it in a different light. Like, okay, your experience is, I know it's hard, but this is part of the process. Like, you are part of this bigger story too, which I think it can be helpful. And just because we're on the kind of the hot, it's so easy to be deflated and discouraged. there's a comment from a viewer on YouTube talks about happier people who grieve because people that fail to grieve repress it, and those who repress it suffer more. I mean, this is not Pollyannish thinking, right? Having hope is not the same thing as being stupidly optimistic. I guess we have hope that something, we have hope because in a practical way for things to change. And what else? I guess the other part for me is, what else are you going to do? Like when you see that there's injustice in the world, and it makes you sad. Well, I'm sorry. Like we got to feel that. But what else are you going to do? You got to act as if there's hope. Otherwise, nothing ever changes, right? So, Tony. Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I was gonna throw one more therapist answer in the ring before we moved on to anything else. So yeah, the other thing that comes to mind is Brene Brown's concept of like, you can't selectively numb emotion.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just numb pain and sorrow. Like if you choose to numb emotion, you're also going to numb joy and happiness and gratitude.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we have to go into those negative or difficult feelings in order to feel the joy of, change and transformation.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. Yeah, Tony.
I was thinking about what Miller said earlier, and like even from Carrie's question, like from the perspective of the patient, it's like we all like feel those like moments of sadness and despair and hopelessness. And in this passage is telling you it's okay to be that way, because on the flip side, again, the prescriptive part is you got to be happy, regard like, well, sometimes it's just kind of hard for me to be happy knowing that like things are falling down around me. Yeah, like per the job description, like this is a crappy job, it's dangerous, there are no OSHA regulations, you may be hurt, but this is what we got to do to get it done. But I also don't think that God wants us to live in a state of perpetual sadness. I think which is why the latter part of the Beatitudes came out, because like even though you're going through this, as Melissa said, these things are not mutually exclusive. They can exist at the same time. And again, those messages are a little complicated for most people to really grasp, because we've been so used to this soupy form of religion that we've been fed. But when you really chew on it, like it's really, really complex. Yeah, there was a movie came out. It was a kids movie. I cannot think of the name of it. Miller, you may remember. It's about Melissa too. It was about emotions. It's about this little girl and how she develops her emotions, and how like you have like these one-sided emotions of the child, and they're just this one color. But as you go up, like you realize that inside out, yes, Chris.
Inside out,
like, like when you're a child, you only cry when you're sad. But as you get to be older, you cry when you're happy. So like these are really complex emotions and complex systems for people to understand, and they don't have to be excluded from each other.
Thank you for that. That's so good. Absolutely. But by the way, Tony, I think it's like you wore this shirt in anticipation of the conversation today. So that's
I feel like there was the cartoon used to come on when I was in my teenage years. I'm not gonna say I was a kid, called the Shirt Tails, and all the Shirt Tails had these little shirts that I always had. Man, I feel like a 55-year-old shirt tail, because like most of the time when I wear a shirt, it's gonna have some type of message on it.
Right.
And like this message right here, y'all, I hate it when I run into y'all's right-wing cousins, like at Hardee's, and like I walk in and this older white gentleman goes, "Oh yeah, I just love that shirt. Amen, brother." And I'm pretty sure he's going to a church that's saying it was okay what happened to Tyree Nichols last week. And like y'all kill me again, pretending to be such great Christians. You're just horrible people. Yeah. Like, because like once he did it, he didn't come back and engage me anything, because I was waiting on him to ask me what it meant. Waiting. Right.
Yeah. That's the thing about t-shirts. They can always be taken. I'm sporting my one from First Methodist today. So that's the Miller, go ahead.
Here, I'll show off my shirt too.
Yeah.
It's not just mercy. It's just mercy.
That's right. Yes.
Anyway. Emphasis is everything. I wanted to catch some comments.
Oh, thank you.
I love this image from Teresa, just talking about dealing with the negative emotions and the Beatitudes. One must imagine Sisyphus happy.
Right. Pushing that boulder up the hill.
Right.
I'm getting further this time.
I mean, in my mind, like, the fact that that it needs pushing.
Right.
Like something.
Well, so, and I know I want to get to other comments, but I do think so. There's two things I want to point to. One is two books, actually. One is Rebecca Solnit's got a book called Hope in the Dark, in which she talks about the purposes of hope. And I'm listening to it right now, really, really enjoying it, because she's going back and listing all the things that have changed, and the way that things are slow to change until they change. And she says part of the problem is we don't celebrate victories, and we've got short little attention spans, and there's also kind of this despair is fashionable. And she's basically critiquing the far left. Despair seems to be the thing, like the fashionable thing, but despair is like an easy out, because then you don't have to do anything. So I appreciate her message. There's another one is she didn't come up with it, but Joanna Macy talks about that there's three big narratives, right? There's the great unraveling, which is everything's going to hell in a handbasket. There's business as usual, which is we can keep just doing whatever. This is how it's always been. It's always going to be this way. And there's nothing you can do about it. And then there's the great turning, which is that, there is a process that's unfolding that we get to be part of. And she's talking specifically about the environment, but I think it can apply to a lot of different things. That there are these three narratives, they're always operating, and kind of like, Melissa, like you were saying earlier, they can be operating at the same time, sometimes in the same person or the same event or writing. So anyway, I think part of it is like which narrative is operating in the moment, right? All right, I'll stop. But those two books to me are really good. One's called Hope in the Dark. I can't remember the title of the other one by Joanna Macy, but I think it may be The Great Turning. Go ahead, Melissa.
Oh yeah, I wanted to catch another comment. Camille says, these passages speak of how we could possibly create heaven on earth, but Jesus is saying that is not going to happen. These things will be waiting for you when you die. But this shows that heaven is for those who accept others and want justice for all. It's just difficult to feel that we have to wait, since most folks want things now.
Mm-hmm.
If I could tag on to that, this reminds me of a conversation my spiritual director and I had a few months ago that really effed me up, for lack of a better term. And some of this is related to a book that she plans on writing, so I'll just share a snippet. But what she pointed out to me is that Jesus never once in all of his teachings promises that there will be some utopian future on earth. And in fact, kind of suggests and alludes to, like, there will always be oppression, there will always be pain, there will always be. And yet, again, we live in this, 2,000-year removed future of theology where it's like, if we just get all of our ducks in a row, if we just do what Jesus says, then Jesus will come back and everything, all the sinners will go away and everything will be perfect. And how much pain that theology has caused for people. And the question that my spiritual director and I mulled over is, like, if we don't believe that, if we don't believe that a perfect future is coming, what does that free you up to do? There's not this perfect future to potentially lose or miss out on. Like, what freedom comes out of that as far as how we move through the world?
Wow. I like that question. Thank you for that. Yeah, Tony?
I'm reminded of, I want to say, of that J.D. Wentworth commercial, like, I want my money and I want it now. Like, I want my benefits from Jesus and I want them now. Like, again, these suspect benefits that we have being a Christian, we're not going to get them until we die. And I think that's part of the conservative mechanisms for the Christianity that they practice. Like, no, we can enjoy this here on earth. So we got to amass as much money as we can, take from as many people as we can, so that we ain't got to wait for heaven. Like, we can have this now. And when you do that, you just kind of run over people. when you start talking about justice early, one of my other favorite T-shirts I have is it says that the opposite of poverty is not wealth; it's justice.
Yeah.
And like there are so many times when we have had other words that have been substituted for justice, like righteousness. Like I never thought about righteousness as a substitute for justice, but like that's really what it is. I mean, with the opposite of poverty being justice, not wealth. Like we don't really think about that. And even when we think about justice, like even when justice goes right for my people, it's still somehow wrong and jacked up. Like this whole Tyree Nichols thing is just, we talk about dichotomies of emotions. Yeah. Like, yes, I'm glad that they got those 5 police officers off the streets and they should go to jail and whatever happens to them, so be it. I'm really, really glad about that. What I'm not glad about is if these were 5 white officers, right, we'd be looking at a whole different type of justice. Like not one time has anybody in the media vilified Tyree. He was a skater. He was a 150-pound-year-old black boy. Like he was just, cause they just want to hold him and kiss him. You know, only because the perpetrators were also black.
That's right.
Because if they were not, we would be a year down the road just trying to see this video, hearing like newscasters talk about it was just horrible to watch. It's always horrible to watch.
Right.
Always horrible to watch. So like, hopefully this can be a blueprint of what like justice looks like when these incidents, but I doubt it.
Right. Yeah.
I seriously doubt it. But we'll talk about justice. Like the one time we see justice done, like I was so proud of my people for not burning down these cities and like they were crapping on the Capitol 816 because like it finally happened the right way. But I warn you, don't let it happen like this again. We're gonna burn down some more stuff. But this is the way it's supposed to happen. This is the way it's supposed to happen. Yeah. And like when justice is not just. Yeah. You know, that's what we get. And it's so sad. And again, but these are the people who claim to be like so close to Jesus, they're like his first cousin on the mom side. Like, no, you're terrible people.
Yeah. No, I hear that. Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, the context makes all the difference, and it's the way that people respond to that is largely because the media has responded, hasn't vilified him at all. In fact, I've loved seeing that his skateboarding, his art, just he's a complex human being, and it's awful that he is not contributing to the beauty of the world anymore because of this violence.
But the rest of those little boys were the same way. But we didn't hear those narratives because of who killed them.
Philando Castile, Trayvon Martin. I mean, the list is too long.
Tamir Rice, 14 years old.
Yes, ridiculous. You're absolutely right. And even someone who used drugs, or even like looking for a reason to justify the murder of somebody, which is what typically happens, didn't happen in this case. And that's the way it should happen. And it's hard not to be like, well,
pissed off.
F me. Right. I mean, just really, I'm so glad. Yeah, exactly.
I'm glad and pissed off all at the same time.
This is the way it's supposed to happen.
Pissy gladness.
But why couldn't this happen 50,000 other times? I totally hear that. And that's I want to say that's one thing that's not in the Beatitudes is, happy are you who are cynically happy and pissed off at the same time. Yeah. Because that's what it should say. Like, oh, thank you.
Thanks, God.
Right. Oh man. Yeah. I do think though, and I just to bring it back around, because I want to validate everything you just said, because it's so I think it's in this passage. Like, I think it should be in there, right? But I think it's hinted at. I like the prophets are like, oh, really? I mean, that's you get that sense when you're reading the prophets, and by Jesus tying what we're experiencing now to Micah and Elijah and all these characters, Deborah and Anna, and going way back, all the prophets who were hoping for a better world and the range of emotions they experienced. Like, God, do you have my back? Really? And when change did happen, they're like, oh, finally. Or, all of that really, I think, is encapsulated in this hunger and thirst for righteousness. I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you for a rich discussion. Again, I appreciate all the sharing too, especially because, like, even going into today, I was like, how do we address this? And I feel like, because I get exhausted talking about, oh yeah, another shooting or killing of an innocent black man. And yet it's interesting how sometimes, gathering around the text, the lectionary speaks to whatever's going on. The Bible speaks to whatever's going on in the current moment, without us having to jigger it too much to make it fit, Anyway. So shall we close out our, oops, where's my,
can I submit Pissy Gladness as our Lenten theme this year? Like, that could
Pissy
carry
Gladness.
Another t-shirt.
I love it. Pissy Gladness. All right.
Oh yeah.
There we go.
And I was about to read it too.
That's all right. We could always use more prayer.
Oh God, who has folded back the mantle of the right to clothe us in the golden glory of the day, shake from our hearts all gloomy thoughts and make me glad with the brightness of hope, that I may effectively aspire to unwon virtues through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
So thank you all for joining today. If you're streaming on Facebook or YouTube, if you don't mind clicking like or just leave a comment so we have a way of counting you, I would appreciate that. I'm going to stop the stream. Excuse me. Oh, before I sign off, if you're in Birmingham, we are having a seed blessing and seed exchange on February 10th, which is a Friday, at my place. So that's on Facebook. It's also on meetup.org. The details of that, those of you who would like to bless your garden preparations, feel free to participate in that. So I'm going to sign off, and those of you on Zoom, stick around for just a minute more.